Okay.
Right. Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. I'm so glad you're doing well, and I'm glad you're here. It's like refreshing to see you during the week. So we're learning Maseches Taanis Daf Lamed, and we're starting about 9 lines down at the 2 dots on Lamed Amud Aleph. Today we'll be finishing about 3/4 of the way down at the 2 dots. We'll save the last, in total, Amud or so for the Siyum Im Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow night. And let's get started. Today is a straightforward, relatively simple daf about some of the halachos of Yom Kippur, as well as some of the halachos of Tisha B'Av. And this is on the heels of the fact that our Mishnah was dealing with some of the basic halachos of Tisha B'Av. As you may recall, we learned about the many things that happened on Tisha B'Av, that both Batei Mikdash were destroyed, of course, on that day, very well known. In other Maseches, we learned why that's the case. The famous one is about Sinas Chinam, but there were others that the Jews were involved in the 3 capital crimes of Gilui Arash, Vichusam, and Avodah Zarah. Still others write that the Batei Mikdash were destroyed Shelo Be'erchu B'Torah Tchila, that they were learning Torah for academic purposes and not for the sake of getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which really is learning Torah Lishma to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu a little bit better. So let us enhance still more our understanding of Tisha B'Av. The Gemara opens Lamed Amud Aleph 9-10 lines down at the 2 dots. We had said that Erev Tisha B'Av lo ye'achel adam beis tavshilin, that one should not eat multiple foods, multiple types of cooked foods. Says the Gemara. Let's add a double qualification, both from the same Amora, Amar Rav Yehuda. Lo shanu, when do we say that this is true? After the 6th hour of the day, namely after Chatzos Hayom. That's when we have the limitations of not to have a meal that has 2 different foods in it. Aval Mishay Shos Lamata. Before that, let's call it 11 a.m. on a perfect day, 6 a.m., 6 p.m. Perfect day. So then before noon, you can eat whatever you want. Of course, we don't mean noon, it's halachic noon, but halachic chatzos. And then the second comment of Rabbi Yehuda is as follows. Rabbi Yehuda lo shanu el b'suda hamafsik ba. Only the suda that is the actual last suda that you'll have, as we refer to as the suda hamafsekes. It's the final meal that we have prior to the fast of Tisha B'Av. Aval b'suda she'eino mafsik ba. If you plan on having multiple meals that day and you want to stuff your face in one of them, great, just don't forget to bench and then wash again to be in line with whatever the proper Suda Hamafsekes should be. And that would then be mutter. V'tarvaihu lakula. In both of these cases, the statements of Rabbi Yehuda, they were meant to be a leniency v'tzricha, and we needed both of them. Why did we need both of them? Says the Gemara, Lamed Amud Aleph, about a quarter of the way down. But if we only had the line about Rav Yehuda in regards to Tisha B'Av, that our limitations have to do with the last meal, so then Havamina, even if it was earlier in the day, if my Suda Mafsekes was at 11 a.m., I might have thought that there was restrictions there. Kamash Malan, no. The only time the restrictions of 2 meals applies is Mishay Shos Sulamala, only after Chatzos Hayom. If I only had the line of Rabbi Yehuda that limits us in regards to later in the day, then have a mina fil b'suda she'ena mafsik ba, that if at 2 p.m. I have a meal, but it's not my last meal, maybe I would have thought that's the meal with all the restrictions. Any meal past chatzos kamash malan b'suda hamafsik, but only the last meal. And here we have 2 brises, Tanya Kilishna Kama and Tanya Kilishna Basra. We have Mishnayos, we have brises that seem to support each of the shitas of Rabbi Yehuda, even though we paskin seemingly. We seem to paskin like both of them. Here's brisa number 1. Tanya Kalishna Basra. Here is like the second comment of Rabbi Yehuda. Hasoed Erev Tisha B'Av, a person who is going to eat on Erev Tisha B'Av. So Yim Asid Liso Suda Cheres Mutter. If he's going to have another meal after this meal, then Mutter, he's allowed to eat whatever he wants. No restrictions of however many cooked foods he wants. No problem at all. Lechol Basar V'Lishtos Mutter Lechol Basar V'Lishtos Yain. He's allowed to eat meat. He's allowed to drink wine. No restrictions. Bimlav. But if he's not going to have another meal, then asr lechol basar v'lishtos yain. And that's one brisa. So here's another. Just about halfway down, Tanya Kalishna Kama. Here's like the first line of Rabbi Yehuda. What does this brisa say? Erev Tisha B'Av lo ye'achel adam shnei tavshilin lo yochel basar v'lishtos yain. He says you're not allowed to. That's the Tana Kama. You're not allowed to eat 2 tavshilin. You're not allowed to have basar, and you're not allowed to drink wine. Rabbi Gamliel Omer Yeshana. You should just change whatever your normal meal is. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ketzad Mishana. What do you mean by changing your meal? How do you change your meal? So this is incredible. This is what the Gemara says. That if you normally eat 2 foods, you should eat 1, or according to some, yochal min acher, 1 letter change. The dalet and the resh are so similar. So if you say that I used to eat 2 meals and now I'm only supposed to eat echad, fine. What if you say it was used to be 2 meals, but now I'm supposed to eat acher, different meals, still 2, just different. So that's a very, very small drop of ink that has some implications about how to understand this properly. The Brisa continues, if normally you have 10 people at the table, so then this meal, so you should only have 5. Wow. If you were pounding 10 cups of wine at the table, you should scale it back. Today is not such a celebratory day, even though there's a mitzvah to eat, as we know on Erev Tisha B'Av to some degree, not really like Yom Kippur, but conceptually, we should feed ourselves. Shosa chamisha kosas, you should drink a little less. And the Brisa continues, when is all of this true? All of this only applies after Chatzos Hayom, because all prior to Chatzos Hayom, you can do whatever you want. Another brisa on this topic, 2/3 of the way down, 8 lines or so before the wide lines. Tanya Idach, another brisa writes as follows: Erev Tisha B'Av, on the fast before Tisha B'Av, before we start our fast on Tisha B'Av, I should say, Lo ye'achel adam shnei tavshilin, lo ye'achel basar, lo yishtad yayin divrei Rav Meir, a shita that we've seen already, that you're not supposed to eat 2 different cooked foods, no meat and no wine. This price is a little different. Yes, you should be mishana. You can eat things, but it has to be different. Kate said, how do we minimize meat and how do we minimize wine? Says the Gemara, if you would normally eat a litra of basar, a very large piece of meat, no problem. So instead of ordering the full ribs, you order the half ribs. No big deal. Just eat a little bit less meat, half.
I'm assuming you're doing the season before this. Eat 8 9 if it's not on Erev Shabbos.
Because it's the 3 weeks.
That minute came later.
Yeah, it's seemingly later. Yeah, I mean the Gemara, when we reference the only limitations that we saw for Tisha B'Av. Right. By the way, I walked over. I did a bris this morning. I did 2 actually. This woman comes in with this cup. She's like, "Can you please use this cup for the bris?" This thing held like literally a half a bottle of wine. And I looked at her. I'm like, listen, I've got another bris after this. This is a really bad idea. I'll get the baby drunk out of this one, but I'm going to drink out of my cup. Thank you very much. Also, sidestepping an issue of Tfilas Kalim, a whole host of things were going on in my head when I said that. I tried to avoid it like the plague. So then I left the cup at the bris. So annoying. And in the next bris I went to, they had an open bar, so I got a glass cup, which has way fewer halachic issues than cheres or anything else. And I used a glass cup for kiddush. I have my own wine. I always bring them. Yeah, the Talmud of Moshe has a tshuva about this, like what's considered a real cup. It's better to use a real kos if you can. So a glass cup's better than styrofoam for sure. And glass is mutter. Even during the year, we alternate glasses for milchik meals and fleishim meals. That's fine. We're machmer by Pesach, but in general, glass does not absorb. That's our halachic assumption. By glass? Yeah. Potentially, but it's owned by a guy in that case. So it's not mine. It's not a violation.
Yeah.
Did you know about that in advance?
I didn't know, but I will tell you that the mother was Jewish by birth, and the father was like a real Italian. I mean, like just like a real. But I only met him. I saw him. I'm like, oh. I should have. Okay, no, don't like that. I should have invited the chevra, but I didn't. It would have been great. Yeah, it was very fancy, very very fancy. Yeah, mimosas in hand before. I've never done this at a bris before, and let us all raise our glasses and say l'chaim. Every single person standing there had a glass of alcohol in their hand. Super secular on my part. I'm sorry, but it was. I don't even remember. 1, I don't know, 12. It was an 11. It was an 11 o'clock bris. Anyways, to your point, Michael, it's a great question. Why are you eating meat on Erev Tisha B'Av? So the answer is that a couple of blot ago, we learned what the actual formal restrictions are during the Shavua Shechalbo, and it's only 2 things. It's laundry and getting haircuts. During that week. That's it. That's all the Gemara says. No reference to basar. We're makbid on it because it's the right thing to do. Quoted in Shulchan Aruch too. Rishonim added in, but that's not what we're up to. Okay, good. So says the Gemara. Wow, that was a real sidetrack. So then says the Gemara 2-3 lines before the wide lines that if you are higher ragi lishtos log yain, if you drink a lot of wine, yishtachatzi log yain, you should drink half. What does that mean, by the way? Halacha l'maaseh, does it literally mean 50% or does it just mean less? Okay, according to this sheet, we'd have to dig into the meforshim to understand what he means. V'im'ena ragil kolik, or if you're someone who is really vegan. I never eat meat. So then today you can't have meat and you can't have any. Today's not the day to start, becoming a carnivore. That's not allowed. You're abusing the privileges of the day. Also, that's not allowed. Last short line, Rashba Gomer, so if in general a person were to eat some radishes or a salty food after the meal, then he's allowed to do that. Another brayso, Tanya Idach, Kol Hayom Kol Shehu, thank you. Kol Shehu Mishum Tisha B'Av. Everything that is done because of Tisha B'Av. What does that mean? Kol Shehu Mishum Tisha B'Av. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi's about a third of the way down from the top. Rashi says, Dibra Hamaskal Kol Shehu Mishum Tisha B'Av Kigon Suda Hamafsik Ba. So let's go back to where we are. Kol Shehu Mishum Tisha B'Av. That meal of Suda Hamafsekes. Aser Lechel Basar Basar Lishtos Yain Basar Lirchotz. You're not even allowed to wash your hands. What does that mean? Okay, that's an interesting piece of Gemara. It doesn't mean about bread. It just means rechitza of tainug of some kind. Kol she'eno mishum Tisha B'Av. If it's not because of Tisha B'Av, what does that mean? Let's go back to Rashi. Kol she'eno mishum Tisha B'Av kigon suda hamafsik ba b'tainis tzibur inabi suda she'eno mafsik ba, meaning a regular meal, right? It's just a regular meal. If you're just eating a regular meal, then mutter lechol basar b'lishtos yain, and either v'asar lirchot or mutter lirchos, depending on how to understand the gears of the Gemara. The Brisa contains Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishum Aviv Kol Shasha Mutter Lechol Basar Mutter Lirchotz. He holds that there's a direct link between the two. Whenever it's mutter to eat meat, it's mutter to be rochetz, and that is our discussions so far in regards to the meals and how to balance them out prior to Tisha B'Av. Good. Tanu Rabbanan. Kol mitzvos hanoagos be'evel noagos be'tisha b'av. We make a direct extension, and it's a very sharp comparison between the world of Avelus and the world of Tisha B'Av. How so? Aser be'achila u'shasiya. There's a limitation on eating. Uvesicha v'nilas asandal of tashma shamita. All of the general restrictions that we're familiar with of anointing and wearing leather and tashma shamita. Of course, is aser throughout Shiva. V'aser likros b'tor nevim u'ksuvim. You're not allowed to learn Tanakh. B'lishnos, b'mishnah, b'talmud, b'medrash, b'halachus of agados. You're not allowed to learn mishnayos, or you're not allowed to learn Gemara. You're not allowed to learn midrashim, halachos, and agados. See, the shas that we have is a blend of all of them. But what did the word Talmud mean? So it probably meant just the baselines of our Gemara, like learning what the Amoraim wrote, not all those Shakla B'tari, but what the Amoraim wrote could be. This would require some research too. Aval. One is allowed to learn something during Tisha B'Av that they're not used to reading. What if it says you're not allowed to learn Tanakh? What if you're not used to learning Tanakh? Does that mean that it becomes allowed? Okay. If you never learned Gemara, all of a sudden you can pick one up on that day because it's harder to learn. It's hard to learn new things. You're allowed to learn the negative aspects, the sadder aspects, the depressing aspects of our liturgy. And all that being true, kids don't go to school, they don't learn that day. Kids don't have the maturity to have the emotional space of Tisha B'Av, but we do restrict them from learning to show them the severity of the day, that we are not going to learn. Why? Because fundamentally, Pikude Hashem Yeshar Misamche Lev. Famous pasuk that we all know, that when one is really immersed in proper Talmud Torah, it generates a sense of contentment, generates a sense of happiness, a sense of simcha, and therefore it's restricted. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, I disagree with the Tanna Kama. He says, Af eino kori b'makom she'enu ragil likros ve'eno shana b'makom she'enu ragil l'shanos. You're not allowed to learn things that are uncommon. But just because they're uncommon doesn't mean they're not going to be misameach. You're not allowed to learn them at all. Aval kori hu be'iyo v'v'kinos v'dvam harem shebiyirmiyah. He agrees to the rest of the Mishnah, to the negative side, that one is allowed to learn Eov and Kinos and the bad parts of Yirmiyah. And he also agrees as well, V'tinokos shal beis rabban b'tel and bo mishum shene'emar, because of the pasuk b'kudei yishar misamchele. We're pretty makbid on this. We don't learn Torah on Tisha B'Av unless it's halachos of Tisha B'Av mamish. It was shaila to ask. That's why in Avelus as well, you'll see that Avelim who are interested in learning will learn sugyas and Avelus. That's mutter to learn because it's inyan diyoma talacha l'maisa. That's fine. You have to be focused on those. 4 lines from the bottom. The Gemara says, quoting from our Brisa, Lo yochal basar v'lo yishteh yain. Tana, the Brisa writes, Aval ochel hu basar meliach. You're allowed to eat salted meat. We'll see what the parameters are. V'shosi yain megito. You're allowed to have wine from the press. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? You can have wine from the press. Basar meliach had kama. So how do we define salted meat? Amar Rav Chinana bar Kahana mishmei de Shmuel kol zman either she'eino kishlamim or that it is kishlamim. And Rashi writes that it's 2 days and 1 night because that's the shiur of nosar of a shlamim. So if it's been salted for that long, if you could imagine a beef jerky that's been sitting in salt for a very long time, maybe, I don't know, we make it differently now because we have refrigeration and everything and we can marinate. It's a good question of whether or not that would apply to beef jerky. It doesn't matter now because we don't eat meat before Tisha B'Av, but in theory, in baseline halacha, would you be able to eat beef jerky prior to? It's not steak. We love it. It's great, but it's not fine. That's a good question. What's v'yayin megito? How do we define wine that's in a press? Says the Gemara ad kama kol zman shu toses. As long as it's fermenting. And let's see a brisa that speaks about this. Tana yayin toses ein bo mishum gilui. Remember, we spoke about this mayim megulim and yayin megulim and chalab megulim, that if there are liquids that are left out, we were always concerned, and this is still true today, that there might have been a snake of some kind that was thirsty and drank a little bit and swapped out, backwashed a little bit, but backwashed some venom. Now, just a little science about those snakes doesn't work that way. They have to extend their fangs in order for the, okay, but that's what the Gemara was concerned about. And famously, as mentioned when we came across this before, this is a famous comment of the Gra. The Gra writes here that, okay, let's say we know that there's no garden snakes in the house, there's no boa constrictors, we know that there's no snake, please God, there's no snakes in our house. When we hear about them, they make the news. It's very rare. So nowadays we know that there's no eres, that there's no poison inside of our drink. So why mayim megulim? So there, the Gra highlights an idea that which the Chachamim said is not allowed. They showed you 1/100th of what they were actually thinking. And don't think that you're clever enough to say, like, oh, I know how to paskin a shayla. I know how to. You don't know how to figure it out, and therefore mayim megulim, we do not drink it at all. So we try to cover it. However, if the wine is still fermenting, there's no issue of mayim megulim. Why? Snakes won't drink it because it doesn't taste good at this point. It's still getting to the point of tasting good. So therefore, says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom, yayin toses, wine that's still fermenting, ein bo mishum gilui. The kama tisisa. So how long does it normally take for things to ferment? So 3 days. So from the time that they threw the sugar in, or whatever the actual breaking point of time is, for 72 hours, from that's still considered fermenting, no prohibition of gilui. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, kachayim in hagos Rabbi Yehuda b'Rebbi Loi, erev Tisha B'Av. This is what he would do on erev Tisha B'Av. Rabbi Yehuda b'Rebbi Loi, he would do the following: Vivian lo pascha reva. They'd bring him some very dry bread, bimelach, with some salt. The Yoshev, and he would sit top of Lamed Amud Beis, our last turn of the page to finish the Masechta. Ben Tanur lekirayim, he'd sit between the oven and the wall. It was like the filthy part of the kitchen that's really hard to clean. It was gross. So it says Rashi right here, makom menuval shebebayis. It was the grossest place in the house. Fine. The ochel v'shose ala kiton shel mayim. He would eat and drink over there. He would drink some water. The dome kimisha meso muta lefanav. Wow. The imagery is very powerful. This is what he would do on Erev Tisha B'Av. And this is what the Gemara is feeding us, a little bit of an emotional, it's not even a euphemism, it's just a simile or a metaphor of what we're supposed to be feeling over here. It's supposed to be kimi, just like Shemei Samuta Lefana Rahman al-Islam. That's the emotional space. And that's why we have a custom to sit on the floor on Erev Tisha B'Av and we eat food that is typical for a base avel, the egg and the ash. We don't eat ashes in a base avel, we eat it with ash. Fine. The Mishnah writes on Lamed Amud Beis, end of the second line, Tanan Hassam, we have another Mishnah. Makom shenagu lasos malacha b'tisha b'av osin. If there's a place where people would normally do malacha on that day, they're allowed to do so. Makom shenagu shelo lasos ein osin. But if you live in a city where no one is nohek to do work, you should not do work. Ubechol makom tamid chachamim b'telim. This is like the mussar of the community when you shut the kololim down and nobody has morning seder. Rashba gomer lo'olam yaseh kol adam atzmo ketamid chacham. Sometimes you're considered to be a Baal Gaiba, to put yourself on the level of a Talmid Chacham. But here, everyone should put themselves on the level of a Talmid Chacham to be mevatel on that day. Nobody learns. We're not learning in the morning. We're sitting in the base medrash on the ground or on our little kitty-type chairs, and we're saying kinos. That's what we're doing. Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa supports this idea of Rashbag as well. Rashbag Omer Lo'olam Yaseh Adam Atzmo Ketamid Chacham Kedei Sheyis'aneh, so that there will be inui, so that he can understand the severity of the day. Tanya Idach, another Brisa, Rashbag Omer Kol HaOchel V'Shoseh B'Tisha B'Av. If you have someone who's really rebelling, they're eating on Tisha B'Av, Ki'ilu Ochel V'Shoseh B'Yom HaKippurim. That's the reverse comparison. It's a very powerful and negative comparison. Remember, of course, that eating on Yom Kippur as a Chiyuv Karesh, and the day of Tisha B'Av is the day that's derabanan. Afal Pikein, we don't mean a halachic comparison, we mean a conceptual comparison. Rabbi Akiva Omer, if you're going to work on Tisha B'Av, then that money you're going to make that day is not going to see any bracha. The Chachamim say, if you do malacha on Tisha B'Av and you are not misabel on Yerushalayim, and you are not also misabel, it's a double factor, not single. So then eino roas b'simchasa, then you will not see in the happy side of the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, Simchu es Yerushalayim. There should be a happiness in Yerushalayim. Begilu ba kolo haveha, and then there will be a rejoicing of all those who love it. Sisu ita masos kol hamisabel aleha, and there will be a joy for the people who are misabel on Mikan Amru, and this is where we learn this idea from, a third of the way down. Mikan Amru kol hamisabel al Yerushalayim zoche v'ro b'simchasa, that anyone who's misabel on Yerushalayim will be zoche to see in the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. And of course, the obvious other side of this sentence, a good question from methodology, why did the Gemara bother to bring this? It's pretty obvious. Again, it's a real estate question. Why did they have to articulate that? Something to be discussed in the Meforshim. Tanya Nami Hachi, the
real estate question? What'd you say?
On
This
the
guy.
daf, it's based on the daf.
It's your brain just could not handle, just unbelievable. If I would have said it was a nursing home question, what would have happened? Yeah, it's just an unnecessary double line. You said the positive, I can infer the negative. We're bright people. Let's let it be.
I was saying, what's the real estate going on? Now I know.
Now you know. Yeah. Tanya Namihachi, the Brisa writes, today's daf has been sponsored by no, not Monarch, by Gerald Cost Realty. Is it Realty? Yeah, you can write a check to Chicago Mila whenever you're ready. Kola ochel basar, the Brisa writes, Tanya Namiachi, kola ochel basar b'shose yain b'tisha b'av. Anyone who Rahman al-Islan eats on that day, of course, obviously against halacha, their sins will be on their bones. Rabbi Yehuda mechayev b'kfiyas hamita v'lohodu lo chachamim. We had learned in our Mishnah that one should flip over their beds. In other words, one really shouldn't be sleeping on a regular bed. Tanya, there's a brisa. The brisa writes, we're halfway down. Laman Amid Beis, almost done for the day, just 10, 12 more lines. Amru lo Rabbi Yehuda, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, you're the one who holds about kfiyas hamita l'dvarecha ubaros umeinikos. You have a woman who's pregnant, she's very uncomfortable. What kind of beds did they have to start with? There wasn't like high quality. They were sleeping. These weren't good beds. They weren't modifying to the curvature of your body when you lay down. So a nubaros, a woman who's pregnant, can be very uncomfortable to start with. Umenikos, women who are nursing, an interesting inclusion. They're always coupled together. And halacha came out. I think they're almost always included together in these types of things. Ma tehei and Rabbi Yehuda, how far do you take it? Do you say that a woman who's an ubaro umenika, that she should be sleeping on the ground, just on the dirt? Like, is that really normal? I didn't mean that. Of course, it has to be reasonable. These are dinei chachamim. These are not dinei d'oraisa. So we're allowed to have a svara to them. When there's a din d'oraisa, you may not want to agree with what's happening. That's fine. But the halacha is what the halacha is, and you have to deal with it. But when you're dealing with dinei d'rabanan, then there's more of a svara involved. This just came up in Madison, Wisconsin. I went up to do a circumcision. The mother of the baby was part of a giur process from a conservative rabbi, a female conservative rabbi. She was upset at me that I wouldn't make a bracha on the bris. Rabbi first has given me the Masorah. These are the brises you take. I've heard it from other rabbanim as well, because that way they'll know that their baby is a goy, because no one else is going to tell them. If they get a conservative or reform, it'll be like, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu ala milah. So I said to the rabbi, I said to the Rebbetzin, I was trying to find the right thing. I said to her, she said, I heard a rumor you're not going to be making a blessing. I said, correct. She's like, I don't think I want to hear anymore. You know what? Like, we've been doing the same thing for 3,800 years. You came along 100 years ago and changed what Klal Yisrael has been doing for 3 millennia, and I became the bad guy all of a sudden. Don't put this on me. That's not right. That's the beauty of Torah Judaism. What we do today, this has been going on for centuries. Like, come on, like, that's ridiculous. You can't make me the bad guy because you decided in your own wisdom to change a din d'oraisa. We don't have the latitude to do that. Some people don't like the bracha the bracha of shalos anisha. Great. Ask the chachamim what to do when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt. Meantime, Shulchan Aruch, Shach, Taz, Mishnah Brura, move on. I'm not saying it's all enjoyable. It's not all enjoyable. Some things are hard to swallow. I got it. I understand. But don't make somebody else the bad guy because you decided to be me'aker seif in Shulchan Aruch. It's not right. Tanya Namihachi, the Brisa writes as well on the same idea. Moder Rabbi Yehuda l'chachamim b'she'enu yachol. Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim agreed that the case we're talking about is she'enu yachol. U'modem Chachamim the Rabbi Yehuda b'yachol. They all agreed. So if they all agree, then what's the machlokas about? My benai. You said that there's a din of kviyas amita. So if Rabbi Yehuda says that there's a din of kviyas amita, you got to flip all the beds over. But everyone agrees, the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda as well, that it only applies for the right people and ubaros and meinikos are exempt. So then what's the machlokas between them? My benai, the nafkamina is ika benai she'ar mitos. What about the guest bedroom? Do you have to flip that mattress as well? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you do. All the beds in the house have a din of kviyas amita. According to the Chachamim, it depends. It depends. If you're sleeping in the bed, you turn it over. Otherwise, you don't. The Tanya, the Brisa writes as much. That's a shita Rabbi Yehuda. Omar Rava, Hilchas HaKetana Didan. We hold like the Tana who says, we completely reject this shita and we do not flip our mattresses. We are going to stop right here and Yemir Hashem pick up tomorrow night with a siyum. It's a short blot tomorrow, a regular time, 8:40. We'll have some flesh for dinner. Wishing you all a beautiful night.